When it comes to criminal investigations and intelligence, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, is at the pinnacle of expertise and professionalism. Since its creation in 1908, the FBI has single-handedly tackled some of the most challenging federal crimes and cases of terrorism in the United States, so they take their flowers here. They have one mission and one mission only: to be the eyes, ears, and handcuffs of the US government. With such a pristine track record, the FBI might seem like they could never go wrong, but this is not the case. Here are 9 people wrongfully convicted by the FBI. Richard Jewell. In the early hours of July 27, 1996, an explosion went off near a sound tower in the park's crowded spectator area. The bomb, constructed with nails and pipe fragments for maximum damage, was placed inside a backpack that had been left intently under a bench. It detonated, causing chaos and panic among the park's attendees. Impact from the explosion killed 2 individuals and injured more than 100 others. Alice Hawthorne, an unsuspecting bystander, and Melih Uzunol, a Turkish journalist who suffered a heart attack while attempting to tape the event, were the victims who died. Sports arenas are often secured with strong perimeters, including fencing and controlled access points. Baggage is also screened using X-ray machines, metal detectors, and explosive detection equipment for safety. Regardless, this one slipped through. Richard Jewell, a security guard, discovered the suspicious backpack containing the bomb, alerted authorities, and also assisted to evacuate people from the area before the explosion occurred. Jewell's timely response was widely praised, and he was initially hailed as a hero by the media. However, within a few days, the situation took a disturbing turn. As an employee, Richard Jewell was wrongly accused of the Centennial Olympic Park bombing. Based on profiling, the FBI considered him a suspect, although he was eventually cleared of any involvement. Eric Robert Rudolph, a different guy, was subsequently convicted of the bombing. Jewell had become the primary target of the investigation. The local media, relying on anonymous law enforcement sources, began reporting that Jewell was a suspect in the bombing. His background, including a history of wanting to become a cop, his somewhat unconventional behavior, and the notion that he fit the profile of a lone bomber, misled authorities into pinning him. He was later cleared of any involvement. It turned out that the actual perpetrator of the bombing was Eric Robert Rudolph, an anti-government extremist. On May 31, 2003, Rudolph was finally captured in Murphy, North Carolina, after years on the run. He was later connected to several other explosions that targeted abortion clinics and a gay bar, among other infrastructures. Finally, in 2005, Rudolph pleaded guilty to the Centennial Olympic Park bombing and other related acts, all of which accumulated to multiple life sentences without the option of parole. The bombing at Centennial Olympic Park was a tragic and disturbing event that ruined what was supposed to be a celebration of athletic excellence and global harmony during the Summer Olympics in 1996. Despite the tragedy, the Games continued, and security precautions were statutorily improved for the safety of future Olympic events. It remains so to this day. James Joseph Richardson. Some parents do unspeakable things to their children, but there are extreme boundaries that even the meanest parents should never cross. In 1967, James Joseph Richardson was convicted of poisoning not 1, not 2, or even 3, but 7 of his children in Florida. The FBI contributed to the error in the investigation by providing flawed forensic evidence. After more than 20 grueling years on death row, his conviction was overturned in 1989 based on new evidence revealing that he was innocent. The case quickly gained widespread attention due to the unimaginable tragic nature of the crime and the subsequent discovery of his innocence. Here's how it happened. James Richardson, an African-American migrant worker, was living with his wife, Annie Mae Richardson, and their 7 children in Arcadia, Florida at the time. On October 25th, the Richardson children were rushed to the hospital over an unprecedented illness. Very sadly, none of the children could be saved. All efforts by the medics failed, and one after the other, all 7 of them passed away almost immediately. James Richardson found himself in a distressing situation when he was promptly arrested and accused of the murder of his own children. The main evidence against him rested on a statement he had made to a police officer earlier, which later came under scrutiny due to questions about its reliability. There were concerns that the statement may have been falsified or obtained through coercion. Following the tragic deaths of his children, suspicion quickly fell on James Richardson, and his statement to the police was viewed as a significant incriminating factor. However, as the case progressed, more questions began to emerge regarding the credibility and trustworthiness of that very statement. There were allegations that it may have been manipulated or coerced, casting doubt on its accuracy and raising questions about the validity of the charges against him. The disputed nature of the statement became a focal point as the case unfolded, raising doubts about the fairness and integrity of the investigation. Their unfortunate demise was a crushing blow to the family. This probably motivated the hurried investigation and suspicion on the part of the FBI, which immediately pinned the father, James. Richardson was found guilty and condemned to death death during his trial in 1968. Luckily, the Supreme Court abolished Florida's death penalty legislation, and his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Richardson served time for more than 20 years, while still maintaining his initial stance of innocence. In the early 1980s, new evidence emerged that called Richardson's guilt into question. Conflicting medical opinions on the cause of the children's deaths and reports of witness intimidation during the trial were presented as evidence. Additionally, another family member confessed to the bizarre crime on his deathbed. Journalists, activists, and legal organizations were radically involved in Richardson's case and attempted to uncover the truth. Investigative reporting, as well as efforts by the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and other advocacy organizations, drew massive attention to the wrongful conviction. Following his release, Richardson's case became a symbol of the inadequacies of the American criminal justice system and the dangers of false convictions. He maintained his innocence and sought compensation for the years he had spent in prison. Florida Governor Rick Scott passed legislation in 2014 that awarded Richardson $1.2 million in compensation for his unlawful conviction and imprisonment. The Four Framed Men. This is probably the most famous case of a defective justice system in the United States. The event, which took place in Boston, has been recorded as one of the FBI's most devastating blunders. So what happened? Well, in 1965, a petty gangster in Chelsea, Massachusetts by the name of Edward Teddy Deegan was mysteriously murdered. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, conducted investigations and apprehended multiple individuals. Among those arrested were Joseph Salvati, Peter Limone, Louis Greco, and Henry Tamaleo. Unfortunately, the convictions of these men were based on the testimony of unreliable witnesses, people who had ties to the mafia. These witnesses provided incriminating information against Salvati, Limone, Greco, and Tamaleo, which led to their arrests and subsequent trials. It was eventually revealed that the FBI officers involved in the investigation engaged in flagrant misconduct and corruption. They concealed vital evidence that would have undermined the credibility of the witnesses and established the four men's innocence. The agents coerced witnesses into lying and willfully allowed perjury during the trials. Two of the four men died in prison. Peter Limone spent 33 years in jail, and the fourth, Joseph Salvati, spent 29 years in prison too. Years later, in the 1990s, a breakthrough came when a longtime FBI informant and mafia member, Vincent Jimmy Flemmi, confessed to his lawyer that he and his colleague, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, were responsible for Deegan's murder. This staggering disclosure prompted another investigation to determine exactly how the FBI handled the case and the extent of its misconduct. The U.S. Department of Justice was determined to get down this complicated rabbit hole, whatever it was going to take. They put in the work, reanalyzing existing and emerging evidence, and ultimately exposed the FBI's misconduct, while also confirming the innocence of Salvati, Limone, Greco, and Tamaleo. The investigations revealed that Barboza had lied during the trial, and that the FBI, along with corrupt individuals within the law enforcement community, had suppressed useful evidence that would have exonerated the four men. It was discovered that Barboza was the actual killer, and that he had falsely implicated Salvati, Limone, Greco, and Tamaleo to protect other mob associates. The case drew disruptive attention to the failures and indiscretions within the FBI and raised significant concerns about the integrity of the justice system. This resulted in lawsuits against the FBI and the federal government. While the men's lawyers did not ask for a specific amount in damages, in court documents, they cited other wrongful conviction cases in which $1 million was awarded for every year of imprisonment. This further motivated the judge, who awarded $26 million to Mr. Limone, $29 million to Mr. Salvati, $13 million to Mr. Tamaleo's estate, and $28 million to Mr. Greco's estate, as well as awards to the wives and children that brought the total to a whopping $101.75 million. This, to this day, is the largest sum of money ever awarded to victims of wrongful convictions in U.S. history, and rightly so. Stephen Hatfill. Former biodefense expert Stephen Hatfill was mistakenly connected as a person of interest to the 2001 anthrax attacks in the United States. This was a biological attack where powdered anthrax spores were deliberately put into letters and mailed through the U.S. postal system. 22 people, including 12 mail handlers, got anthrax, and 5 of them died. The event sparked widespread panic in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. As is the case with any biological attack, no one knew who had it or who didn't. Also, no one knew what part of the country it was spreading to. It was tough and very confusing, even for the FBI. They raided Hatfill's home and workplace, and he became the primary focus of an intense media investigation. His life was badly interrupted, and his reputation suffered from his erroneous association with the anthrax attacks. However, as the investigation progressed, it became obvious that the FBI's judgment of Hatfill was misguided. In 2008, the Department of Justice reached a settlement with Hatfill, acknowledging his innocence in the case. The government agreed to pay him a substantial sum of money as as compensation for the harm caused. So what motivated the FBI to suspect Hatfill of being involved in the attack? Well, for starters, Stephen Hatfill's background as a biodefense researcher with substantial knowledge of biological weapons and anthrax was the first factor that put him in the FBI's crosshairs. Due to his portfolio, Hatfill had direct access to anthrax spores during his time at the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Another reason for his suspicion was that the FBI developed a psychological profile of the likely anthrax attacker, suggesting someone with a scientific background and a grudge against the US government. Hatfill's past grievances and reported animosity toward the government fit this profile. Hatfill reportedly talked about the potential use of anthrax as a weapon and had received training in biological warfare defense. Some reports suggested he had tried to obtain an anthrax vaccine before the attacks, raising concerns. Lastly, Hatfill lived and worked in the areas around where the anthrax-laced letters were mailed, so his proximity to the attacks further fueled his wrongful conviction. These factors, individually and collectively, contributed to the FBI's initial suspicion of Stephen Hatfill. The investigation shifted its focus to Bruce Ivins, and Hatfill was ultimately exonerated after new evidence showed that Bruce Ivins, a microbiologist who also worked at the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, was responsible. Ivins had access to anthrax spores and was linked to the specific strain of anthrax used in the attack. However, before formal charges could be filed against him, Ivins died by suicide in 2008. By interpretation, the FBI officially identified Ivins as the sole perpetrator of the attacks. The US government agreed to pay Hatfill a settlement, although the exact amount was not disclosed. The Duke Lacrosse case. You probably know that the government and people of the United States take sexual crimes very seriously. This is a widely reported case from 2006 involving 3 members of the Duke University lacrosse team and an alleged sexual assault that the FBI assisted to investigate. The infamous case drew widespread attention and sparked a heated debate about how race and social class influenced the disparities when handling cases of sexual assault. On March 13, 2006, members of the Duke lacrosse team at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, held an off-campus party and invited a woman named Crystal Mangum as a stripper. Reports had it that as the party progressed, 3 players of the team joined Crystal in the bathroom and assaulted her. The case gained significant media coverage and quickly became a national controversy in the US. In response to the allegations, local law enforcement authorities in Durham, North Carolina, initiated an investigation. The Durham Police Department and the Durham County District Attorney's Office worked on the case, which was led by the prosecutor, Mike Nifong. During the investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, became involved and assisted local authorities with forensic analysis of evidence, including DNA testing. The case generated substantial public interest and interest from various groups, with many initially assuming the guilt of the accused players based on the nature of the allegations. However, DNA test results in December 2006 showed no match between any of the lacrosse players and the genetic material identified. This development dealt a significant blow to the prosecution's case and raised damaging doubts about the validity of the allegations. The accusers and witnesses' claims were inconsistent and contradictory, undermining the credibility of the accusations. Second, the DNA mismatch between the accused players and the samples significantly weakened the case. The identification method was also problematic, since the accuser chose her attackers from a specific lineup of lacrosse team members exclusively, raising questions about its accuracy. Moreover, evidence suggested that the accuser may have had personal motivations and biases, which could have influenced her allegations. These combined factors damaged the prosecution's credibility, and the support the accused players received from the community led to the eventual dismissal of all charges. The pressure came on Mike Nifong, the district attorney, as he faced allegations of misconduct and withholding exculpatory evidence with possible malicious intent. In early 2007, the North Carolina State Bar filed ethics charges against Nifong, accusing him of supplying false statements to the court and illegally compelling witnesses. Later that year, Nifong was sadly disbarred for his actions in the case. The Duke lacrosse case had a profound impact on Duke University. The incident significantly affected the school's reputation and image as it garnered extensive media coverage and raised questions about the university's handling of the situation. In response to the incident, Duke University implemented policy revisions and reforms. Changes were made to the code of conduct for student athletes. Improvements were made to sexual misconduct prevention and response programs, and communication and crisis management protocols were enhanced. These actions aim to address the shortcomings exposed by the case and prevent similar situations in the future. The Duke lacrosse case serves as a lasting reminder for the university and the broader community about the importance of transparency, fairness, and upholding the principles of due process within educational institutions. Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot. In 1984, Oklahoma-born Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot were convicted for the murder of Denise Haraway, a young woman from Ada in the same state. Haraway went missing from the convenience store where she worked. Despite an extensive search, her body was not found. Since no evidence was available, the case went cold for a while. However, in 1985, Carl Fontenot and Tommy Ward were arrested and charged with her abduction, rape, and murder after a skewed investigation. During the heated police interrogations that followed, Ward and Fontenot provided confessions. However, it was later revealed that their confessions were forced. Both men were mentally challenged and susceptible to manipulation, which made them highly vulnerable during the interrogations. Eyewitness testimony further aided their arrests. One witness claimed to have spotted Fontenot and Ward near the convenience store around the time of the crime. Cases like this make you wonder how much one can trust eyewitness reports in a big debate concerning law enforcement and the judiciary. The prosecution built a case against Ward and Fontenot based on circumstantial evidence. This included the same forced confessions and alleged statements made by other individuals. They were mentally challenged or intellectually disabled individuals. Their intellectual limitations made them more likely to be manipulated and coerced during their interrogations. And of course, this is what had happened. This vulnerability played a significant role in their wrongful convictions in the murder case of Denise Haraway. Appropriate support and legal protections are typically provided for individuals with intellectual disabilities to ensure fair and just legal proceedings. However, they still got sentences. Both Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot served significant periods of time in prison. Tommy Ward was convicted in 1985 and spent more than 35 years in prison before his release. Carl Fontenot was also convicted the same year and served approximately 34 years before his release. In September 2021, Tommy Ward and Carl Fontenot had their convictions overturned. New evidence had emerged, revealing that they were coerced to give inadequate confessions, investigations were premature, and also that the DNA samples discovered implicated another victim, Tommy Lee Ward, who was also from Ada, Oklahoma. There was no physical evidence linking Ward and Fontenot to the crime scene. Despite an extensive investigation, no fingerprints, DNA, or other forensic evidence tied them to the abduction, rape, and murder of Denise Haraway, for which they had already served 35 and 34 years respectively. This is another classic example of the FBI's overambitious convictions and the miscarriage of justice. The Greenville Four. In 1967, Charles Edward Wakefield, Christopher Vaughn, James Robert McLean, and Isaac Williams were accused and convicted of the murder of a white cab driver named Claude Texera. The case against the Greenville Four was based on questionable evidence and primarily depended on coerced confessions. There were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and the convictions were largely based on testimonies collected under duress and intimidation by police. During their interrogations, the defendants, who were teens at the time, said they were exposed to physical abuse and threats. Despite a lack of convincing evidence, the four men were found guilty and heavily sentenced. Wakefield and Vaughn received death sentences, while McLean and Williams received life sentences. The death sentences were reconsidered for a couple of reasons. If it is established that the defendants did not have appropriate representation during their trial or subsequent appeals, their death sentences may be reconsidered. In circumstances where defendants did not have access to competent legal counsel or their attorneys failed to provide an adequate defense, the death penalty can be challenged. Second, violations of the defendant's constitutional rights during their trial or sentencing might motivate a reversal of death sentences. This can include denial of due process, racial bias in jury selection, or the use of malicious, unreliable, or forced testimony. Furthermore, higher courts can evaluate and review the legitimacy and fairness of death sentences. If errors or discrepancies are discovered during the initial trial or later appeals, the death sentences may be modified or overturned. Based on these factors, the death sentences were changed to imprisonment. All along, they never stopped fighting for their liberation and maintaining their innocence. Charles Wakefield, Johnny Wright, Teddy Dixon, and Larry Williams were finally convicted in 1967 and served an agonizing 32 years in prison. In the early 2000s, new evidence emerged to back the Greenville Four and their claim of innocence. Key witnesses came forward, retracting their previous testimonies and disclosing that law enforcement had pressured their evidence. Other evidence also led to suspects who were not pursued during the initial investigation. The Greenville Four's cases received increased attention because of the efforts of determined attorneys and advocacy groups. The evidence of their erroneous convictions forced the legal system to re-examine the cases. News of the release of the Greenville Four from prison was received with a mixture of relief and fury. The men had spent over 3 decades in prison for crimes they did not commit, and their lives had been irreversibly altered as a result of their erroneous convictions. Family members, supporters, and advocates gathered to see their long-awaited liberation. The media coverage of their release shed light on the defective injustices they endured, igniting debates about wrongful convictions and racial imbalances in the criminal justice system. Donald Eugene Gates. This is another example of a wrongful conviction where the FBI played a sensitive contributory role, and this time it happened in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Capitol, in 1981. Gates was wrongly convicted for the rape and murder of a Georgetown University student. Gates was arrested and convicted in 1981 based on circumstantial evidence and eyewitness testimony. The key evidence against him was the comparison of hair found at the crime scene to his own hair sample. During Donald Eugene Gates's trial, hair analysis was widely used as a forensic technique for linking individuals to crimes. It involved visually examining hair samples under a microscope and comparing characteristics such as color, length, and diameter. At the time, hair analysis was considered reliable for individual identification, as each person's hair was considered unique. However, advancements in DNA analysis later revealed the limitations of hair analysis in distinguishing between individuals with similar hair types, leading to potential misidentifications and wrongful convictions. Gates maintained his stance of innocence throughout. Investigation and justice were shabbily served. Despite having a valid alibi and no other evidence linking him to the crime, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison and spent more than 27 years behind bars. Advances in DNA technology allowed for a re-evaluation of the evidence in Gates' case over time. The Innocence Project, a non-profit dedicated to exonerating wrongfully convicted individuals, took up Gates' case in 2009. They tested DNA on evidence from the crime scene, including preserved semen that was recovered from the victim's body. The DNA study results firmly excluded Gates as the source of the sperm, indicating his innocence. Gates's conviction was reversed based on mismatching DNA evidence, and on December 16, 2009, he was released from prison, but not after spending 27 grueling years for a crime he did not commit. His case exposed the failures of the criminal justice system and emphasized the need for DNA testing in overturning wrongful convictions. The case of Donald Eugene Gates also played a significant role in highlighting the flaws of hair analysis as a conclusive form of evidence. It prompted a re-evaluation of forensic practices and an increased reliance on DNA analysis, which offers higher accuracy and specificity in identifying individuals. Today, hair analysis is often used in conjunction with DNA analysis to provide supplementary information in investigations, acknowledging its limitations as a standalone method of identification. Gates started to rebuild his life one step at a time, and today he stands to raise awareness about the devastating effect of a miscarriage of law. His case serves as a powerful reminder of the sad impact of faulty forensic evidence and the need to continually improve the criminal justice system. James Chad Lewis Clay. This is the last and most complicated case on our list today. It involved a 15-year-old girl who was sexually attacked in an alley near Hayes Street and Harper Avenue in Detroit, Michigan on November 12, 1997. In her statement, she recounted being dragged into the alley at gunpoint and raped, all the while with a towel placed over her head. She had never seen her assailant before. The girl was sent to the hospital, where a rape kit was produced. The crime remained unsolved. The kit and more than 10,000 others were not submitted for DNA testing until 2009, when the Detroit Police Department received a federal grant, a procedure that took several years. In 2017, a DNA profile developed from the rape kit was linked to James Chad Lewis Clay because his DNA profile was in the FBI's DNA database from a previous conviction for possession of a stolen vehicle. The rape victim, a lady now in her 30s, was requested by Detroit police to assess a photographic lineup of possible suspects. This lineup included a photograph of Clay as an adult. She was unable to identify Clay. Clay also denied attacking her when questioned. When he was shown a recent photograph of the woman taken in 2015, 18 years after the attack, he denied knowing her. "I never seen her. I do not know her. I never saw her a day in my life." When he was notified that his DNA had been identified in the rape kit, he became angry. He is recorded saying things like, "This is crazy. I never dated her. I don't know her." On August 4, 2017, he was charged with first-degree criminal sexual conduct. However, the case was far from complete. After the woman eventually discovered Clay's full name to be James Chad Lewis Clay, she went back to authorities with new information that she in fact had a boyfriend in high school named Chad, with whom she was sexually involved at the time. She said she met him through a friend named Dion, who was 5 feet 2 inches tall, had green eyes, and played high school basketball. She claimed that she and Chad frequently skipped school to spend time together at Chad's aunt's residence. She also stated that she had a scar on her arm. When authorities questioned Clay about the woman's claims, he countered that he lived with his mother at the time and denied having sexual relations with the girl. He also denied knowing anyone named Dion or spending any time at Dion's aunt's house. But in a dramatic turn, Clay suddenly admitted to remembering the woman and their sexual sexual interaction 20 years back. During her trial in November 2017 in Wayne County Circuit Court, the lady further said she had no recollection of Clay or having consensual sex with him. The prosecution produced evidence that Clay's DNA was discovered in the rape kit. Due to the size of the sample, there was extra DNA material present that was not recognized. Regardless, Clay was convicted of first-degree criminal sexual conduct on November 12, 2017, based primarily on DNA evidence. He received a sentence of 25 to 50 years in prison. Clay's mother enlisted the help of Stephen Crane, a private investigator, to reinvestigate his case while it was under appeal. Crane had been working on another case for Clay's cellmate, who recommended Crane's services. In 2019, Crane obtained a photo of Clay as a teenager and showed it to the victim. She identified the photo as her consensual boyfriend named Chad from high school. When shown a photo of Clay as an adult, she identified him as the man who raped her based on seeing him in court. Crane then discovered Dion McIntyre, who confirmed knowing the victim and Chad, and identified Clay's adult photo as Chad. Crane shared these findings with Clay's appellate attorney, Melvin Houston, who declined to review them. As a result, Crane contacted the Michigan State Appellate Defender's Office, and an investigator from that office joined forces with Houston. After facing difficulty in getting anyone to take action on the case, Stephen Crane shared his findings with reporter Elisha Anderson from the Detroit Free Press. Anderson conducted further investigations and on July 19, 2019, published a detailed account of the case, including interviews with the victim and McIntyre, both confirming the information Crane had uncovered. Clay's aunt also disclosed that Chad had frequented her home near the victim's residence. Prior to the article's publication, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office and Clay's attorney, Melvin Houston, filed a joint motion with the Michigan Court of Appeals to release Clay. The prosecutor's office initiated an immediate investigation upon learning of the identity issue. Consequently, on July 23, 2019, Clay was released from prison. Subsequently, on August 31, 2019, Judge Wanda Evans of the Wayne County Circuit Court dismissed the case.